Testing. We need to keep in mind the upcoming anniversary, which is a month from today. And since it happens also to be the same day as the marathon, we'll be starting later than we would normally start, which it turns out isn't such a bad thing after all. Some of the people I contacted were quite happy that we would start at 11 for Bible school and 12 for the service. But those coming from the States, the issue there is that the bridge will be closed until 9:30 and the tunnel till 10:15. So we want those folks, give those folks time to get here on October the 19th. So the building will be open earlier than that for people that want to come early or people that might be coming early from places in Ontario, and we can have a bit of time for fellowship then. Then we'll have a Bible class that will be led by Al Meeks. Then we'll have our worship service. The speaker will be Stuart Bailey. That will be followed by a dinner downstairs and then a session in the afternoon where we will have a chance to share and remember things that took place, not 100, well, yes, we'll remember things that happened 100 years ago, but none of us will be sharing that, at least. Pardon? Well, none of us were. So that's the thing that we found when we were talking about organizing this day. Waterloo had their 50th anniversary, and asked David what went on, and he said, people got up and talked about when it started and so on. Well, we don't have that luxury, of course. In fact, I guess I'm the one that goes back farthest. And I was born, let me see how many years. Well, I know when I was born, but how many years after the church was established here? I think it was about 23 or 4 years late after the church. You're over 80. You're right, it does. Close to 20. No, it wouldn't be under because, anyway, I wasn't here. So a lot of our memories will come from more recently than that period. But we do have information from history of what went on earlier, and even back in the 1800s when there was a congregation here in Windsor. But it disappeared, and so this is not part of that original congregation, but a reestablishment of it. Anyway, that's a lot to say. That please join us, and we will be posting a list to make sure, or you could sign to make sure that we have enough food, and we hope that everybody can attend on that day. It's off again. Um, Lucky we have a full-time IT person right now. Anyhow, I didn't hear anything else for our prayer list, so Philip, if you would like to lead us, please. Amen. Thank you very much. So if we could help with the distribution of handouts, Daniel, that would be appreciated. The last lesson in the series on 1 Corinthians, so it's fittingly entitled Final Matters. We want to take a look at how 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2 can be used to demonstrate that there's a pattern for congregations to follow regarding giving. How can congregations learn about financial propriety from 1 Corinthians 16, 1 through 4? What can we do to help one another be vigilant, courageous, and more dedicated to the cause of Christ? And again, the theme really of 1 Corinthians, why should love be our motivating factor? Well, I pointed it both ways, Drew, and don't worry about it. I'll just use this. You must have a magic touch. All right. What I'd like us to do is to take a look at the opening of 1 Corinthians and the conclusion of 1 Corinthians. In many ways, 1 Corinthians is typical of the letters written by Paul, and in some ways it's a little different. So what I want us to do then is to look at this pattern. For our example, let's take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 1, and let's look at what Paul is saying in the first 3 verses. So what is he saying in 1 Corinthians 1 and 1? All right, and so this is typical of the letters that Paul wrote. It is there, obviously. He is identifying and giving a description of himself as the author. And Sosthenes is named as well. But what do we know about Paul's letters that indicate that he did not do most of the writing himself with his own hand? Right. That's right. So in one of his letters, that is what he ends it with. Notice with what large letters I write. And remember, Paul talks about a thorn in the flesh. And so we think that might involve his eyesight, especially because he was blinded on the road prior to his conversion. Maybe totally separate from that, but that's an assumption that we make. So normally in those days anyway, there would be someone who would write the letter down while it was orally dictated by the author. So that's a typical opening for a letter. The second verse, what does he say there? So in terms of our modern letter writing, what is he doing in the second verse? Okay, so he's indicating who the recipient of the letter is. And this is something, of course, that we regularly do as well, to whom the letter is addressed. And what about the third verse? So what would that correspond to in a modern letter? Sorry? No, it's not a closing. He is giving a greeting, isn't he? And in our modern letters, we would say, if we're writing to a friend, dear Hermogenes. Or if we're writing to an organization or a company, and we know the individual, we would say, dear Dr. Smith, or dear Mrs. Jones, or whatever it might be. And if we're writing to an anonymous entity, we'd say, to whom it may concern, right? And most of the time when we write that, it doesn't concern anybody because nobody pays any attention to it. But anyway, that's beside the point. So that is the way that letters start today. That's the way letters started back in Paul's day as well. All right, now let's go to the last chapter of 1 Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 16, and let's look at verses 19 and 20. What is said there? All right, so how would we sum up this? Often we would end a letter by saying something like, I hope that this finds you well, or may God bless you, or hope to see you soon, or something like that, which is again a greeting, isn't it? And he's also including others besides himself who are in association with him at this time. What about verse 21? Yes, that's right. So he's right. This time he doesn't say that, see how large the letters are, but he is writing the greeting in his own hand. So again, this is a further identification of himself as the author. And then finally, in verses 23 and 24, all right, so again, that's the greeting that we already referred to a minute ago that we would include in the letter as well. So these are not unusual things. He's blessing the recipients. Okay, so those are the bookends of the letter. And those are the kinds of things that most letters included. But the companion tells us that Paul also included several unique things at the end of the first letter to the Corinthians. Earlier in this series of lessons, we talked about where Paul was when he wrote the letter. And where was he? In Ephesus, right. And we can learn exactly what he was doing if we turn to Acts chapter 19 and look at verses 8 through 10. All right, so Paul was in the synagogue for 3 months, and then in the lecture hall of Tyrannus for 2 years. And if we look at Acts chapter 10, verses 17 through 19, and also verse 31, we can find there the text of a letter that Paul wrote to the elders in Ephesus. So what did he say in these passages? Okay, so, well, this is what I have here. From Miletus, Paul sent to Ephesus for the elders of the church. That's right. Oh, Acts 20. Yeah, that's right. It says right here, the next chapter. And we were just talking about chapter 19. But the reference that I have typed in here says Acts 10. So much for consistency. So, Acts 20, 17 through 19 and 31. Someone can read that. Okay, so 3 months, 2 years, and a little more because now he says that 3 years in total went by while he was living and working with the church in Ephesus. Uh, now, this time was coming to an end. So he outlined what he hoped to do in the future. These wishes for the future are part of the subject of today's lesson. So the first section that we're talking about today from 1 Corinthians 16, 1 through 4 is on giving. Would someone please read that, please? All right. All right, let's do a quick think, pair, share. This is an easy question, so let's just spend 20 seconds thinking silently when we are first introduced to Paul, what was he doing? All right, turn to your neighbor and say, Paul was. Okay, what was he doing? That's right. They laid their clothes at the feet of a young man named Stephen, named uh, Saul. That's right, Saul. And we say, well, we ask about Paul, Saul. Well, of course, we know that's the same person. It's not uncommon uh, in the New Testament when names are changed. In the Old Testament, they were as well. So Saul became Paul. Now, what was he doing the second time he's mentioned? Again, 20 seconds. Silently. Okay? Okay, what was he doing? That's right. And if we turn to Acts 9, 1 through 6, um, what does it say specifically? So in contrast to our first, um, I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead there. In contrast to our initial picture of Paul breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples, we see a 360-degree swing in his attitude toward the early Christians very shortly after his ministry began. And we read about that in Acts 9:25 through 30. All right. So a big change then in the way that he was acting and was now thoroughly involved and active in the work of the church. Um, Later on, when Paul was at Antioch, um, we read that a prophet by the name of Agabus stood up and through the Spirit produced, or rather predicted, that a severe famine would spread over the entire Roman world. This happened during the reign of Claudius. The disciples, as each one was able, decided to provide help for the brothers and sisters living in Judea. Thus they did, sending their gift to the elders by Barnabas and Saul. So Paul referred to this incident and his inner feelings about it when he wrote to the Galatians in Galatians 2:8 through 10. So what is he saying he's eager to do? To remember the poor. Okay, so now he's remembering the poor as opposed to persecuting the first Christians. So in verse 1 of our lesson in chapter 16, Paul referred to what he had said and done among the Galatians regarding the collection and urging them to participate in the relief effort. His concern for the poor was a recurring theme for Paul. And we can see that again in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. Someone would read that, please. right, and again, he refers to it in Romans 15, 25, and 26. All right. So in our reading, Paul mentions that the setting aside of a sum of money should be part of the weekly gathering on the first day of the week, along with the other aspects of our worship service. This, of course, does not preclude the possibility of taking up a special collections whenever they might be necessary. He points out the need for trust and transparency in verses 3 and 4, indicating that he will go along with entrusting the collected funds to whomever the congregation decides is worthy of doing that. And he volunteers to go along himself if the congregation feels that that is advisable. In line with Paul's comments and the need for trust, David Lipscomb wrote, "If Paul deemed it wise to place himself above suspicion and to avoid even giving the most malicious the opportunity of calling his integrity and honesty in question, it must be wise for other men to act with equal caution." So in other words, what we need to make sure that we do with the funds that are collected for the congregation is we need to be transparent about them, and people need to know what they are being used for, and the individuals involved in handling the funds need to be trusted individuals, and that's something, of course, that I think is obvious. So the instruction to begin setting aside money on the first day of the week prior to his arrival demonstrates the wisdom of planning ahead, and the wisdom of having money available for the timeline produced or predicted by Agabus. What Old Testament event foreshadowed this necessity for planning ahead for calamities that might occur? Well, what came to my mind when I was doing this lesson is the name of Joseph. And does that give you a clue? What did Joseph have to do with planning ahead? Okay, for what reason? All right. Remember that if we look at Genesis 41, 46 through 49, and 56 through 57, we read precisely about how this planning came in place. So if someone would read those passages, please. All right, thank you. So let's go back to verse 1 of our reading today and reread it in as many different translations as we have. So we're looking then at, not verse 1, but yes, verse 1. Verse 1, 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 1. So someone read that. Gary read it in his version. Would you read yours again, please, Gary? Okay, and that's, I believe, the New King James. Someone have another version? And that is the NIV. Another? And that is New Living. Another? Okay. Any others? Okay, so we have several different words